Welcome, everybody, to the NFL Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The NFL Show is brought to you by Replenishing Care and Technologies. Make sure you check them out at rcandt.com. I am your host for the NFL Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. How about you?
All right. We got a little bit of NFL news to start off with. Saquon Barkley, of course, is pretty much done for the season for the New York Giants. So the Giants went out and signed Devontae Freeman. Freeman took less money to sign with the Giants. What's your take on this signing?
Yeah, it's surprising. It's what here. He said he took less money to sign with the Giants because he liked the position New York was in. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think he was in play for the Tampa Bay job at some point before they went for Leonard Fournette. I mean, for Freeman, this has got to be an absolute loss. I mean, he signed for about 1 year, $3 million. That's not nearly what he probably could have gotten earlier in the offseason, and he's on a terrible team with a dead-end job, basically, that's going to be up at the end of the year. He's going to be a free agent all over again. He's playing behind an offensive line that didn't block well against the Pittsburgh Steelers, didn't block particularly well in the opening game against the Bears. So I don't like this deal. I don't think it's good for Devonta Freeman. And for New York, I don't think it really matters.
How about this? With Devonta Freeman, the thing I would say is this, though. If he goes there, he's going to be the number one guy. And he's going to get touches. And if he wants to turn this into a much bigger contract, isn't the best way to do it to go to a place where maybe for a year you don't have a chance to win? But in the end, you go there. You don't really have much competition in the backfield, New York. I think maybe that's what he's thinking. So maybe he can go there and touch the ball 20, 25 times a game, prove himself again, and maybe turn that contract into a much bigger contract.
That's probably the only way it makes sense. But even if you look at how he played last year, with Atlanta, 14 games, 656 yards, 3.6 yards per carry. That's what got him to this point. You're playing behind an arguably equal or worse offensive line in New York with Daniel Jones at quarterback, not Matt Ryan. I think you're in a situation where he might actually play worse than he did last year, despite being the number one option. That could affect him probably in the long run. Might make him even less valuable.
I think that it is a great signing for the Giants, though, when we look at it like that. I think it's worth the risk.
Yeah, it's $3 million. You're not putting a lot on the table. And as bad as they've been, I don't think they really have a chance to make the playoffs. But this division, we're 2 weeks into the season, and this division, we've talked about it, a 7-win team could win it all in this division. So they're still technically not out of it yet.
No, nobody will ever be out of it in the NFC East, I think, the way this is headed, unless the Dallas Cowboys can fix that defense. And I don't see that happening. And when you look at it, do you think it's safe to say the NFC East is the worst division in football?
Oh, by far. I think it's by far the worst division, especially when the Eagles are not playing well. It's easily the worst because the only team that right now I feel threatened by is Dallas because the Eagles have been so bad through the first 2 weeks. At the same point, the Cowboys have no defense. The linebackers are decimated by injuries, and they haven't built a defensive backfield. So there's really no defense there at all.
All right, and I always love to talk about, Atlanta and their coaching situation. We had the defensive coordinator, who's a moron. You get the special teams coach, Ben Kotowicki, or whatever the hell his name is, takes the blame for the onside kick fail. What do you think happened here?
I mean, it's how much should you put on the coordinator after this? Because it's up to the players who are standing literally 2 feet from the football to realize, hey, it crossed the point where you need to get on this ball. They're staring there looking at it. There's 3 guys surrounding that ball who just don't even go for it until Dallas has already jumped on it. So I think this is a little bit on the coordinator, but at the same point, I think the players just didn't recognize it. The players got confused by that kind of onside kick. They haven't seen that type of kick many times before, I don't think. At least I haven't seen live games, at least. And I think they got confused, and it showed.
Yeah, but I mean, how do you get confused? If the ball goes 10 yards, you have to get on it.
That's true. I don't know. They're definitely going to be practicing that now. I don't know how much they were practicing that in the week leading up to the game because – we don't see onside kicks happen that often anymore because they usually don't work. But, of course, it happened in a key situation. These guys clearly were not prepared. And I guess you could put that on the coordinator because they clearly weren't ready for this. And in the moment when they had to get on the ball, the only thing they had to do was jump on it and just cover it up, and they didn't do it.
Well, I know the one thing they did mention that injuries affected who was on the field for the hands team. But the thing that concerns me, and I see this with a lot of NFL teams, usually special teams is just practiced, especially stuff like this, on a Saturday, the day before the game. And I think a lot of teams really miss I mean, this is a third of the game, and it's really true that it's a third of the game. And when you look back at guys like George Allen, Marv Levy, Bill Cowher, these were guys that a lot of times would start off every practice with special teams. And I think that anymore, I think people are so, they want to put in their offensive schemes that have, 14 sentences to call out a play, and they have to spend all their time doing that, and they forget little things like special teams. And how many times we've seen special teams cost a team a game?
Yeah, it really comes down to it. I mean, look at just this past week. Harrison Butker was disciplined at the kicker position. He hit the field goal to win the game basically 3 times because there was a timeout, there was an offsides, and then he finally hit the game winner. So special teams is a highly important job, and we've seen guys like John Harbaugh, who started off as a special teams coordinator. He's now a head coach. And they have one of the best kickers in the league, probably the best kicker in the league, Justin Tucker. It's a crucial part of the game because mental mistakes on that side of the ball where it's easy sometimes to have mental lapses because you're not necessarily paying attention. When those happen, you lose games. The great teams will not make those kind of mistakes.
All right, tonight, the Miami Dolphins will travel to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. The Dolphins are 0-2. The Jaguars are 1-1. This is the Beard versus the Stash in prime time. You got Fitzmagic on one sideline, Minshew Mania on the other. Both of these guys, Minshew's played well for 2 weeks. He made a couple really bad mistakes last week. Fitzpatrick played well this past week at a close loss to Buffalo, 31-28. This, to me, is an extremely interesting game because what I think we have here is a team in Miami that a lot of people expected something from that's 0-2, and a team in Jacksonville that I don't know if too many teams expected them to exceed 1 win this season, and they're already sitting at 1-1. I think this is a make-or-break game for both of these teams because if you're Miami, you go to 0-3, I think you're done. And if you're Jacksonville, if you get to 2-1 and your one loss was a close loss to Tennessee, who may be the best team in your division, all of a sudden there is some hope in Jacksonville this season.
Well, the Jaguars are playing out of their minds in the sense they're playing with competitive fire that we haven't seen from this team in a while. Maybe it took getting rid of guys like Leonard Fournette and Yannick Ngakoue and Jalen Ramsey last year who didn't want to be there. Maybe it took getting rid of those guys to get to the point where you had this team playing hard and playing like they want to win games. And Gardner Minshew is playing really well. I know those 2 interceptions last week were crucial. But other than that, he's playing phenomenal. I think the Jaguars probably had the most momentum going into this game. And honestly, I'm giving the Jaguars a little bit of an edge here because they have that momentum and they're playing better than the Dolphins right now.
Yeah, I'm not real sure about this game. And when you look at this, I think the Dolphins' goal was to be able to run the ball this year. They bring in Matt Breida. They bring in Jordan Howard to improve the run game. But through 2 weeks, they've combined for just 70 yards. And actually, Myles Gaskin, who was a 7th-round pick in 2019, leaves Miami with 86 yards. And my concern here, if I'm the Miami Dolphins, is being able to run the ball. And it doesn't look like they can do that right now.
I'm actually a big Myles Gaskin fan. I remembered him from while playing his playing days at Washington. He's a good player. I think he deserves more touches based on how he performed up to this point. But the issue for Miami, it's the offensive line to some degree. They're not really as threatened by the passing game when Fitzpatrick's back there currently. And the offensive line is Austin Jackson at left tackle. He's a rookie. Solomon Kinley at right guard. He's a rookie. Eric Flowers at left guard, and we know he's had troubles in the past. So it's not like his offensive line is fantastic.
He's terrible.
Yeah,
he's a horrible football player.
Yeah, so you got those 3 guys on your offensive line. No wonder you're having trouble running the ball. And let's be honest, you're not really worried about the pass game. It's Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's hot and cold. And the only real receiving threat they have is Devontae Parker. This is a one-dimensional team at best at most times. So I'm not really worried about them. And the offense right now just doesn't have enough there to really concern me if I'm a team with a strong defense.
But the thing that worries me is this Jacksonville, I don't think, is a strong defense. And I think they're last or bottom 3 with sacks and quarterback pressures. They don't blitz much. But I think if they want to be able to do anything this season with a good start, they've got to be able to get to the quarterback. I don't know that they've got the guys to do that without blitzing. And the scary thing to me is since they don't blitz much, they don't get much pressure on the quarterback. If there's ever a game where Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to have one of those Fitzmagic nights, it would be a night like tonight.
Yeah, and that's probably your biggest concern. C.J. Henderson, the rookie quarterback, has been very good for them. But if you look at the other players back there, Trey Herndon, Josh Jones, Andrew Wingard, there's not a star-studded defensive backfield. You do need to have that pressure. Now, I am hopeful. Caleb Von Chase on the rookie up front. Josh Allen has been a Pro Bowler as well. So they have some guys who they can work out better. We got Miles Jack covering guys close to the line of scrimmage. He's a pretty fast linebacker. My concern would be that if you let Fitzpatrick hit a couple deep strikes, hit a couple deep passes, that could kill you. I think the deep ball is what would kill Jacksonville tonight.
See, I think when you look at Miami's secondary, I think the thing that kills them is almost everything right now. I mean, Josh Allen threw for 400 yards last week. Miami cornerbacks were repeatedly exposed on crossing routes and man coverage. Byron Jones was sidelined in the first quarter with a groin injury, so I assume he's not going to play tonight. And when I look at this, I mean, this is a game that's interesting because I don't really know who to pick here because the Dolphins secondary is so bad and Minshew's playing so well. And then you look on the other side, you got Ryan Fitzpatrick, who played well last week. He's not going to get much of a pass rush tonight, I don't think. I think this could actually be a high-scoring game.
It could be because you talked about Miami and their secondary. How about Miami's pass rush? I mean, Emmanuel Ogbah, Christian Wilkinson, Shaq Lawson are your best pass rushers. And they're not bad players by any means, but they're not Pro Bowlers, not 10-sack kind of guys. You're going to have trouble getting a pass rush for those players. So this is a situation. If Byron Jones isn't playing and Xavier Howard doesn't get back into shape because he hasn't looked like a Pro Bowl player that he used to be up to this point, you could be looking at a situation where it's like a 35-31 type game.
Which would be good because that makes the game more exciting.
Well, yeah, I personally, and it's not like sometimes you have the great defenses you want to root for. There's no great defense in this game here. There's no team yet. There's no unit here you really want to do well. So I think we can see a situation where Minshew and Fitzpatrick, who again is always up and down, we really have no idea what he's going to give on any given night. I feel more confident in Gardner Minshew to be the guy to go out there and win the game, though, than Fitzpatrick.
I don't think I can feel confident in either one.
That's fair. They're definitely up and down, but I think Minshew has a higher average than Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick's every other week pretty much with him. I think Minshew at the very least, I know he had the 2 interceptions last week, but I think Minshew will at least give you about 350 yards against a bad defense every week consistently.
All right, so Brian Flores kind of exceeded expectations last year. If they go to 0-3 and he's a defensive specialist and the defense looks bad again, I mean, is there any cause for concern for the future of this team? And when do you finally see Tua Tagovailoa?
Yeah, Tua is the big question here. I think I've always been saying before week 5, that's usually when it happens. Week 4, week 5 is when we start seeing a guy get in there. And they've had some semi-close games the first 2 weeks, so I'm not shocked he hasn't been in yet. But at the same point, once you get blown out, I think week 4 we'll see him because they play the Seahawks in week 4. And I think the Seahawks are going to come in here or wherever the game is, they're going to blow Miami out. I think by the end of that game, we will see Tua Tagovailoa taking snaps and starting to work him into the offense. So I think we'll see him in week 4. But I don't think they'll put him in close games, especially if Fitzpatrick's even playing decent.
Yeah, but the season's on the line tonight. At 0-3, they're done. So I think it's possible you could see him tonight. I don't think it's likely, but I do think it's possible. I'd say 25% chance. I think what happens if you come out and you're losing 17-0 at halftime, so you still got a chance to win the game, and Fitzpatrick has thrown 2 or 3 picks, which is something that could very well happen. We've seen him do it before.
Yeah, we've seen him do it on multiple teams before, so I wouldn't put it past Miami whatsoever. I think Tua would be in – you would have to play him if you're down by 14 to 17 points at halftime and Fitzpatrick's playing poorly. It's the time to put Tua in and see exactly what it is. Because in college, he was an elite player. He was a capable comeback player who could lead winning football teams. So I think we should see him. I think we should have seen him already personally. But, I mean, you got to play him sooner rather than later, in my opinion. If you want to remain competitive, if you want to win 6 to 7 games, it's going to be on the back of Tua, not on the back of Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's so much that I kind of trust Minshew maybe a little bit more just because I think this game's going to be decided by not which quarterback throws for 400 yards, but which one can throw the ball and not turn the ball over. Minshew did have 2 bad turnovers last week, so I don't completely trust him either. But Fitzpatrick's history is to throw for 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and fumble the ball once and lose the game.
Yeah, he's always up and down. He's not the guy you want necessarily in elite kind of situations where you're trying to come back and win a football game. So I wouldn't put much stock in Fitzpatrick. I personally like Gardner Minshew. Let me ask you this. If Minshew plays at his current pace for the entirety of the season and Jacksonville wins, let's say 5 or 6 games, they don't get Justin Fields, they don't get Trevor Lawrence, is he automatically your star for next year?
I would think so if he plays this well. And the thing is this, I'd rather have him than Justin Fields.
Yeah, you think there's that big of a difference?
Yeah, I think Gardner Minshew shows us. He showed it last year in flashes. He showed a little bit now that he's a confident guy. I mean, he looks like he's in charge when he's out there. To me, Gardner Minshew looks like what everybody thought Baker Mayfield would look like.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was say is Gardner Minshew what everyone thinks Baker Mayfield should have been.
Yeah, and I think he is. And I think if you gave Gardner Minshew the weapons that Baker Mayfield has in Cleveland, that Gardner Minshew there would be Minshew mania all over the country right now.
So moving forward, do you see him being a starter necessarily? Because I know he's in a tough spot in Jacksonville, but could he be a starter in 4 or 5 years, or is this just a short-term fix?
I think if they were to restock this roster the correct way, I don't know why he can't be the starter 4 or 5 years from now and have taken him to the playoffs a few times. When I watched Minshew, I mean, he is a guy that looks like the quarterback. And I mean, I think people miss that. You know, when you see a guy, and I've said this before, when they get off the bus, no matter how old they are, you can usually tell the guy who's the starting quarterback, even if you don't know what he looks like, just by the way he carries himself. To me, Gardner Minshew carries himself that way. Baker Mayfield doesn't. I mean, he does when things are going well. But to me, Baker Mayfield's a front runner. If everything's going great, Baker's awesome. And I think the same thing can and has been said about Cam Newton. When everything's going well, his team gets an early lead, he plays great. And then as the game, and when things get tough, he kind of checks out. Now, I also think this. I think that's why Cam Newton is in the perfect place for Cam Newton. Because he's around, is he around 30, 31 now? So he's getting a little bit older. He's going to a place with Bill Belichick where he can actually learn to be a quarterback now. And that's not a shot at him. It is before Cam Newton, to me, got by on natural ability. It's kind of like Randall Cunningham in Philadelphia. The coaching there wasn't great. And when you had a good coach, it was Buddy Ryan, who really didn't give 2 flips what was going on the offensive side of the ball. When Randall Cunningham goes to Minnesota and he's working with, Billick, all of a sudden he becomes a drop back passer. He becomes much more confident, and he became, a really good quarterback in the late 90s, even though he was in his 30s. I think we're going to see that with Cam Newton. And I think with Gardner Minshew, I don't think he gets a lot of play because, he wasn't this high draft pick that everybody thought was going to be great. But, I mean, come on. When we look at it, who thought Russell Wilson would be what Russell Wilson's turned out to be? Who thought Tom Brady would be? Aaron Rodgers was a guy that dropped to 24th in the first round of the draft. So these guys that are supposed to know something about quarterbacks, they miss a lot when you're picking guys in the top 15. I mean, look at the guy, Rosen? Rosen was the guy that was supposed to be the guy. And I think when you look at it now, Rosen and Minshew is 10 times better than Rosen because people miss the fact that there's more to being a quarterback than being 6'4", 230 pounds with a cannon for an arm.
Yeah, and Minshew carries, like I said, he carries himself well. He's also got the mobility. This is not a guy who's afraid. He's not afraid of anything on the field. He really isn't. He's not afraid to go out there and try to make difficult plays and sacrifice his body to try to win games. And if you put him in the upcoming draft, I mean, you already said you'd take him over Justin Fields. So you would take him below Trevor Lawrence, I'm guessing, but you would put him at the second best quarterback in the upcoming draft, is what I'm hearing.
Without really looking at everybody in the upcoming draft, if I had to rank him with those 3, I'd rank him at number 2. I would put Trevor Lawrence at number 1. I'm not 100% sold on Trevor Lawrence.
I hate to tag team against my Clemson guy, but there are some issues with Lawrence's game right now. One of them would be being able to stay healthy in the NFL to some sense. He's a little bit of a lean for him kind of guy. He's taken hits before where he's gotten hurt. So health might be a concern. And also some of the deep passes he makes. I mean, he had a lot of help from Justin Ross and D. Higgins last year. I know people tend to make fun of the fact that he got a lot of help from jump balls last year, but he really did. And so I'll be interested to see how he does this year with guys who are a little bit smaller, not quite as developed, and not quite as experienced as D. Higgins and Justin Ross.
We'll put it like this. I think I've seen a lot of people. There was one person today that posted on a Facebook page asking was there any quarterback as ready to play in the NFL as Andrew Luck since Andrew Luck came into the league? And I made the comment, Joe Burrow. Somebody else put Trevor Lawrence, and they said, well, Burrow wasn't highly thought of coming out of college or coming out of high school. Number one, Burrow was highly thought of coming out of high school because he got a full scholarship to Ohio State University. So right there tells me that a lot of people thought he could play football. And then he goes to LSU. And this is the big thing. Going to LSU, I think, put him in a situation with a former NFL offensive coordinator that helped him learn to play football. The problem is the guys at Ohio State, the Justin Fields, the Dwayne Haskins, whoever it is, they go to an offense that is a strictly college offense. And that's why Burrow was not needed there, because they're not trying to do the things that Joe Burrow can do. What they're trying to do is do things to win college football games. So when people talk about, Urban Meyer is this Mensa football coach, he is when it comes to coaching college football. But, I mean, how many guys at Ohio State and Florida as quarterbacks have really blown up and done great things in the NFL?
Almost none of them. I can pretty much sure. I can't remember one that really has.
Well, this is the thing. Urban Meyer is one of the greatest college coaches of all time, but his system is not conducive to being an NFL quarterback.
Yeah, and we've seen it time and time again from everyone who's really come out there. I mean, Cordell Jones was there. We talked about Dwayne Haskins already. They had a couple of guys from that one class. We had like 3 quarterbacks who all had chances to go in the NFL. It just never worked out. So Ohio State's definitely not produced great quarterbacks in the past. Now, there's a guy in North Dakota State, Trey Lance, and that school produced Carson Wentz. So I'd be interested to see how he does. He's kind of like the number 3 ranked quarterback right now in college football.
Yeah, and North Dakota State runs a pro-style offense. That's why Carson Wentz was comfortable quickly. And when you look at places, Alabama, no quarterbacks that come out of there. I give Tua Tagovailoa a shot because Nick Saban changed the way they ran offense once he was the starting quarterback. And it was more conducive to being an NFL quarterback. But that is still a lot of the questions I have about Tua, because even though they changed the system, what kind of quarterback coaching was he getting there relative to NFL play? So I have questions about Tua there. And, of course, the injuries also. And the thing is this, there's almost no quarterbacks that I don't have some question about, because it's the hardest transition in all of football. I mean, it's a huge transition to go high school to college, but going college quarterback to an NFL quarterback in a live game as the number 1 starter with all the lights on is a hard thing to pull off, which is why most of these guys do flame out if they're a first-round pick. I mean, I would say this. If you look at the last 20 years, first-round picks, how many of them do you think really succeeded? And the thing is, if you're a top 5 pick as a quarterback, succeeded is to win a Super Bowl. I mean, if you're picked number 1 and you're Baker Mayfield, anything less than winning a Super Bowl, you're a bust. I don't care if you make Pro Bowl 20 straight years in a 20-year career. If you don't win the Super Bowl, you were a bust. Daniel Jones, it's just not about not turning the ball over. It's about, can he win a Super Bowl? Because you don't draft a guy 5 or 6 to be really good. You just don't. I mean, when you draft a quarterback that high, you draft him to be your franchise quarterback, and anything less than being a franchise quarterback is a failure.
Well, let's start. But Daniel Jones is a big commitment. Let's start with letting him have winning football seasons before we start talking about Super Bowl expectations here, because they're not right now.
The point is this. Your expectations, if you get drafted high, are through the roof. Now, right now, if you're drafted number 1, and Joe Burrow, 37 for 61, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. He's good there. But the thing is this, 5 years from now, if the Bengals have not made a run at a Super Bowl, he's a bust. I mean, you have to win a Super Bowl being the number 1 pick. And, yeah, this could be the Bengals' fault because they don't put the guys around him. But then Burrow's going to be tired of staying in Cincinnati, and 4 or 5 years from now, he's going to go somewhere else, and he's going to win a Super Bowl if he's that good. I mean, because really, once again, you failed if you didn't, and you're picked in the top 5, even top 10, because that's what you're expected to do. If you pick a running back number 1, you don't expect that running back's going to be the reason you win the Super Bowl. Because how many times outside a guy like Emmitt Smith is a guy the reason you win a Super Bowl as a running back? I mean, how many leading rushers in the history of the NFL won a Super Bowl? Was
Very few. I feel like none in the last 20 years. I can almost guarantee it.
I think it's been like 2 or 3 in 53 years. You get a number one wide receiver. It doesn't mean you're going to win the Super Bowl. You don't think it means that. You think you just made your team better. You pick a stud left tackle number one. It doesn't mean you're going to win the Super Bowl. But what does everybody think when a quarterback is picked number one? They're going to win the Super Bowl. That's what they're picked for, to lead your team, to lead his team, to be a legend, to win a Super Bowl. And I mean, that, whether it's fair or not, is just the way it is.
Well, that's why when you draft a quarterback, he's the face of your franchise. You don't draft a receiver in the top 5 and he's the face of your franchise. That's why receivers aren't taking that high usually. You see teams trade up to get the quarterbacks in the top 5, 6 picks because they expect that from quarterbacks.
Well, I'll tell you that in the last 10 years, the best player that's been drafted is Quentin Nelson. He's the best football player that's been drafted. Quentin Nelson, as a guard, though, as a guy who can be a reason why your team gets better and maybe eventually wins the Super Bowl. But if you look at it, I mean, most people consider the greatest left tackle of all time Anthony Munoz. Nobody says, but he didn't win a Super Bowl because he's the freaking left tackle. It's not his fault Boomer Esiason goes 11 for 26 in the Super Bowl and throws a pick. It's just not. And when you look at that, I mean, how many guys that aren't quarterbacks have had the impact on their team that first year that a quarterback does? How many can you think of?
I'm looking back. I'm trying to think of running backs because the running back feels like that.
Any position. What guy has had an immediate impact to take a team that was crap to a team that was contending for a Super Bowl in his first or second year?
I got none right now.
I've got one, Lawrence Taylor. I mean, the New York Giants were terrible from 1964 to 1980. They draft Lawrence Taylor in 1981. Next thing you know, during the playoffs with freaking Scott Brunner as the quarterback, and they go to Philadelphia, who was the defending NFC champions. They beat them 27-20 in the wild card. They go to San Francisco. They lose 38-24, but a really competitive game. That was all directly tied to the impact Lawrence Taylor had on the football field. And I mean, really, the only guy, and there may be more, but the only guy that really strikes me as having that kind of impact is a quarterback, which is also why I think when we get down to it, Lawrence Taylor is the greatest football player that ever lived, because he was a linebacker that goes to a bad football team, turns him into a playoff contender his first year, and then, 5 years later, they're winning a Super Bowl. That's the impact that a quarterback has. There's been very few guys that play other positions that could have that impact, but Lawrence Taylor was a dude that he could shut down he could shut down an offense by himself.
Yeah, that's why. That's why he's easily the greatest defensive player of all time. And you said just right now the greatest player of all time potentially, because
I think he had the greatest impact on the game at his position.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's come close to that. No one's come close to that.
And put it like this, I don't think it's any coincidence that basically from drafting Lawrence Taylor was then coached by Bill Parcells. Well, after Ray Perkins the first year, and Parcells was the defensive coordinator still. But you had Parcells and Belichick coaching the greatest player that I think's ever stepped on a football field. So you've got two of the greatest coaches of all time coaching the greatest player of all time. Maybe some of the reason why they're the greatest coaches of all time is because they had Lawrence Taylor. And maybe the reason Lawrence Taylor is so great is because he had Belichick and Parcells, because what happened there was nobody else had ever used an outside linebacker like that except for Bum Phillips. Bum Phillips did it when he drafted out of Jackson State Robert Brazil in 1975. And the thing is this, Robert Brazil had that immediate impact on that Houston Oilers defense also, because the Oilers before Bum Phillips got there were atrocious, and then once Phillips gets there, I think the first year they're around 5-5. Brazil comes in, they win 8 or 9 games every year for like 2 or 3 straight years, don't make the playoffs because the AFC Central was stacked with the Steelers, the Browns, and the Bengals. But by 1978, 79, and 80, they're a playoff team every year. And my whole point to this is maybe Lawrence Taylor's not the greatest player I ever saw if he goes to St. Louis, because maybe they're not going to use him the same way. They're not going to have him putting his hand in the dirt. They're not going to have him blitzing from the outside. They're not going to have him dropping into coverage because most guys are pigeonholed. You know, they're either north-south players that stop the run, or they're east-west players that can defend the pass. Lawrence Taylor could do both. He was used almost like a hybrid defensive end, linebacker, safety, and they played him all over the place. And he caused matchup issues. I mean, really, the only team that had any success against him was the Washington Redskins with Joe Gibbs, because he started using motion, and he would use the wing back and the tight end to help damn near double and triple team him. And I mean, Lawrence Taylor changed the way football was played from a linebacker's perspective. And it also, he was so great, he changed the way offenses would attack pass rushing defensive ends and outside linebackers.
I mean, I don't think we've seen the players ever been close to being that dominant. Again, even people will bring up the J.J. Watt 3 defensive player of the year kind of thing, but I don't think it's that close. I think Lawrence Taylor's clearly the more significant player because he changed the game in a way J.J. Watt didn't. But when you're talking about defensive players who come on as rookies to make an immediate change for their team, what about Nick Bosa last year? I understand not on the level of Lawrence Taylor, but Nick Bosa, I think, made a significant impact last year for the 49ers. So that team was not that good the prior season.
Well, I think Nick Bosa came in and, much like Lawrence Taylor, became the best defensive player in football as soon as he stepped on the field his first game. That's how good Bosa is. That is also why I think this 49er season is done. I think that defense was so good because of that front four. And now you got Brenson Buckner's gone because they traded him. Solomon Thomas is gone because of injury. Bosa's gone because of injury. I don't see how a team overcomes that.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, the guy that promoted was Deion Jordan, who's been bouncing around the league. He was a former, I think, higher on pick, and he never worked out.
He was an Oregon Duck, right?
What?
He was an Oregon Duck, right?
Deion Jordan. I don't think he was. I can look real quick, but I don't think he was. I know the other player they signed Ezekiel Ansah. Deion Jordan was at Oregon, actually. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but, see, I'm almost never wrong, Sam. You don't have to look things up.
You know, they signed Ezekiel Ansah, and I remember covering him for Seattle last year, and he wasn't doing anything for the Seahawks. So I think the pieces they brought in to try to replace guys like DeForest Buckner, guys like Solomon Thomas, and Nick Bosa. I mean, they don't have anything there right now. They don't have a pass rush. And they're going to be relying on Eric Armstead and hopefully D Ford gets back to where he was in Kansas City. But otherwise, that front four that was so dominant last year, it's gone.
Yeah, that's why I think the Niners' chances are gone. Because I think Jimmy Garoppolo is better than what you give him credit for. But number one, he's out the next 2 to 4 weeks, maybe longer. And on top of that, I don't think he's good enough to put a team on his back and win. I think Jimmy Garoppolo's ceiling is to be somewhere between 10 and 14 as a quarterback. I think that's about it. And a guy like that is not going to drag your team to the playoffs when they're suffering injuries. Just not going to happen. So
yeah, that's why we gave Carson Wentz so much credit last year, is because he was the guy who dragged us into the playoffs.
Yeah, he's still good enough. Dude, the problem is this: as a quarterback, if your offensive line's really bad, it's hard to drag people when you're already being hit in the knees from the time you get the ball. So, I mean, it's one thing for Carson Wentz to drag a team with no wide receivers, because let's face it, you can find guys all over the place. They can run 4.5, 4.6 40s and run and catch a football. There's not that many guys that can line up and block a Bosa or a Geno Atkins or an Aaron Donald.
Yeah, that's the hard position. That's why the NFL does not have that many great offensive linemen right now. There are plenty of teams that need new units in there because of their age. Just their guys they're playing are not qualified starters.
I mean, that's the one thing where I think the NFL has really dropped off. Because I know my son today, we were watching like the 1973 Bengals highlight film. He's like, game looks so much slower now, or so much slower then. I'm like, yeah, but the difference is this. You watch the offensive line play, it was a lot better then. And there were more rules or less rules against them then, I know, but actually more rules against the offensive line. And, I mean, hell, you had to do the double wing block where you couldn't use your hands, and people had to learn how to move their feet. And now you see so many guys that can't kick step properly, or they can't get leverage because their shoulders will be leaning forward and they get push-pulled all the time. And I think what we've seen is, while skill position players have gotten better, I think the guys in the trenches have gotten worse.
Well, we talk about this with the draft, with guys like Austin Jackson and Mekhi Becton. Or, yeah, physically they're freakish. They've got so many talents in that area, but they don't have.
I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, Becton's unless he gets a great offensive line coach with him. To me, he's a guy that plays over his feet. He's a guy, and most of these guys, when you see their highlights, for some reason, most of the highlights are blocking outside linebackers or safeties that are blitzing that are 150 pounds lighter than them.
Yeah, they're playing the Citadel or something like that. They're not playing Clemson or not playing Alabama.
Yeah. But, all right, who are you picking tonight?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville's got the hot hand. Like I said, I trust Gardner Minshew more than Ryan Fitzpatrick. If you throw Tua in there, maybe it's a different story. But for now, I'm just leaning Jacksonville. Yeah,
I think both of these teams are a long way from being Super Bowl contenders. But right now, it actually, and I can't believe I'm saying this, feels like the Jaguars are about a year ahead of the Dolphins in long-term rebuilding projects. I expect a monster game from Minshew. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I think Jacksonville beats Miami 38-31.
I'll go 35-27.
All right, tomorrow, guys, we will pick all the games for Sunday. We'll recap the game tonight. And also, Sam, we're going to do this differently. I had a request from John Jackson out of Indianapolis, who is betting on games, just little wagers and stuff. But he wanted to know if we could maybe do a straight-up pick and a point spread pick.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll do it.
Point spread picks are tricky, too. But that's how Vegas makes all their money. So tomorrow, me and Sam will be back. We'll pick all the games with the point spread and straight up. Tonight at 9, me and Joe Kelly for the Cincinnati Bengals weekly show. I had something come up last night. So I just hadn't ate all day, and I was really hungry, and my wife wanted to go out to eat, so we did. So the Bengals show will be tonight at 9 o'clock. We'll talk about the Bengals-Eagles game. Tomorrow, me and Sam will be back at 1 o'clock to pick all the games. You can follow Sam Teets at SamTeets33. You can follow me at Grueling Truth. And make sure you check out our sponsor, Replenishing Care Technologies at rcandt.com. So for now, for Sam Teets, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.